Hello and welcome back to Sullivan County 4-H Learn by Doing Outdoor Skills series. It's Kaitlyn, and today we're going to be covering some plants that you should look out for. Mostly we're going to be talking about the poisonous ones and also some of their not poisonous lookalikes. So to start off with, we're going to start with this big guy behind me, and this is a sumac tree. And this particular one that we're talking about that's behind me is actually the non-poisonous sumac tree. So this is a wild sumac, and there is two types. There's poisonous type and a non-poisonous type. They're fairly easy to tell apart. The non-poisonous type has fluffy red berries on it, while the poisonous type has more of a whitish gray kind of berry cluster on it that tends to droop a little bit. Their leaves look similar in shape, and their growth habit is very much the same, but the big thing is the different color of the flowers and berries, which I'll give you a close-up on. And that is how I know, right there in that branch, that this is a non-poisonous sumac, because of the red berries and flowers. So let's get you a closer look at those. And right there you have it. Those nice, fluffy, soft-looking red berries makes this a non-poisonous sumac. But if they were white, grayish color, then this would be a poisonous sumac, and you wouldn't want to touch it. So a lot of the other plants I wanted to talk with you about today, I actually couldn't find at camp, which is both good and bad. So good because you're not going to run into it if you come here, but bad because now I have to draw them on the whiteboard. And we're here in the Science and Nature room here at Camp Shangatong. So let's get started on our plant ID. So a very common one that you hear about is poison ivy. Now, poison ivy is a little tricky, and so is poison oak. They're related to each other, and they can grow both on a vine, which is how a lot of people think of them when you have the name ivy mixed in there, but they can also grow as a shrub. These plants are very adaptable to changes in their environment, so they can really change their growing environment from a vine to a shrub, but as far as identifying them, they have some telltale signs. So usually with poison ivy and poison oak, you look out for things that have 3 leaves connected on one stem from the plant. And they don't tend to get huge if it's a shrub form. They can get pretty tall as a vine, but they usually stay fairly short. But you look out for leaves that are 3s instead of 3s. They're really dark, waxy on the top, so they're a little shiny looking on the top, and then underneath they're slightly lighter green, and they look almost fuzzy underneath them. So on the actual stem where the leaves grow, the 2 lower sets of leaves grow right on the stem, right off of it, and are right next to each other. They don't stagger their leaf growth. And then the 3rd one is out in front, and it has a very small stem connected to the stem of the plant. So that 3rd leaf is the only one that actually has a little bit of a stem on it, and the same thing with poison oak. So the difference between poison oak and poison ivy is poison ivy has a pointed leaf. Sometimes it can look a little serrated, but it's usually this dark green pointed leaf, and a poison oak has more kind of lobed-like leaves. So an example of what that would look like if we were out in the woods. Plant. Of course, this is bigger than what it would look like. And then you would have your 1 leaf, your 2nd leaf, and then a little bit of a stem, and then your 3rd leaf. And again, your poison oak would be more lobed, so it would have a little bit more definition to the leaf, and they're dark green on top and then lighter green on the bottom. So there's a lot of plants in the woods that look a lot like poison ivy, and the reason is because if you want to look like something poisonous so nothing bothers you. The reason why these are poisonous to us is actually their sap. So you won't have a reaction unless the plant gets damaged in a way that it can get its sap on you, and that's when you get a rash and a reaction, and that's to just deter animals and other things from injuring the plant. It's a defense mechanism for the plant. So if you had to choose to be a lookalike, look like something that has a defense mechanism that discourages things from eating you, and that helps protect the other plants that aren't actually poison ivy but do look very similar. So rather than trying to identify if it's poison ivy or not, A good rule to follow is if they have a set of 3 leaves like that, let it be. Set of 3, let it be. Don't touch it. You don't have to go through the headache of trying to correctly identify poison ivy if you just avoid it altogether. So just avoid any kind of plant that looks like it has a set of 3 leaves on the same stalk, and you'll be okay. Another very common one that I wanted to talk about around here is foxglove. And foxglove grows wild here, and it's a very pretty plant. You can also buy it at garden stores. A lot of people use it in their gardens, in their cut flower gardens especially. You might even see it in some bouquets. They are technically poisonous, but if you wash your hands after you handle them, usually you're okay. The reports of foxglove toxicity are small, but it is pretty poisonous, and it has a cardiac type effect with its poison. So you do want to be careful with it, and it gets picked a lot of the times in the woods because the flowers on a foxglove are so pretty, and they're kind of like a bell-shaped flower. They grow on a stalk and they're bell-shaped. The wild ones usually come in a white or a pink form, but if you go to the garden store and you buy a cultivated version, they come in a lot of different colors, and they're even taller than the wild versions of them, which usually stay a couple feet, the stalk. But if you grow them in your garden, you can get them really, really, really tall. So it's important just to handle those plants properly, especially even if you have them in your garden and you didn't realize they were poisonous. Handle them with gloves, or if you're out in the woods, just don't pick them, and you should be okay. But how their flowers look is they have this really nice tall stem onto them, and it's rare to see one that's fully flowered out from start to finish. Usually these bottom flowers will start to fall off by the time the top flowers open. So typically you'll see them in some kind of stage of open. So if these are all the buds, the flowers actually kind of look like a bell, like so, which is why they're so pretty. And a lot of the times, so they have kind of a more open mouth like that, and they'll have dots on the inside of them. So they'll kind of look like this, and they'll have flowers all along the stem, like so. And they'll go all the way down, and they can be tiered in 3s and such like that. They get confused a lot for another very common flower to have in your garden and in cut flower arrangements, which is a snapdragon, and that looks like this. However, you can see the difference between a snapdragon and a foxglove based on the growth of the flowers. Now they both are spike flowers, but as you can see, the snapdragon really isn't bell-shaped. It's much more upright, and it kind of folds the mouth of the flower up because of the little kind of jaws that the snapdragon has. And that's kind of why it's called a snapdragon, because it almost has a mouth to it. So while they do look fairly similar and they come in a lot of the same colors, a snapdragon is different than a foxglove, and a snapdragon is not poisonous like a foxglove is. And the last plant I wanted to talk to you about today is something that is really common, and it can be found on the side of roads, it can be found by water, sometimes on the side of pathways, and that is wild parsnip. Now, parsnips are a root vegetable, but wild parsnip is very different than that. It's not something you can find in the grocery store, and the reason why it's very poisonous is the sap again. So if you damage a plant, if you pick its flower, or you touch its leaves, or if you brush up against it accidentally and open a wound on the plant without knowing and the sap gets on you, the sap is actually phototoxic, which means when you expose it to sunlight, that's when it starts to burn you, and it will keep burning you until the sap is either depleted from its toxins, or you have to cover it to prevent it from burning you further. And the burns can get pretty severe and look as if you burned yourself on a fireplace. It can bubble up, and it's very painful, so you really want to stay away from it. It flowers most often in the growing season, so really from May, starts to flower around the end of May, early June, and those flowers last for 1 to 2 months. And then they form these kind of flat disc-like seed heads on them. They can get very tall. Their flowers are yellow. I'll be sure to throw a picture up on the screen so that you know what they look like. And it just, if you see that plant, just completely avoid the whole thing so that you don't get any of that phototoxic sap on you, because it can burn you very severely. So definitely be careful of that. So today we went over the difference between poison sumac and non-poison sumac. We talked about poison ivy, poison oak, foxglove, and also wild parsnip. So in general, if you don't know what a plant is, just try to avoid it. If it's on your walkway in your hike, you can most likely easily walk around it as long as you're hiking a known trail. And of course, the number one rule is just leave nature be, and you won't have reaction to these things. So I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned how to identify some of the poisonous plants that you might encounter while being outside in nature and how to avoid them. And thank you again to Forage Camp Chickadee for letting us use their facility to film this series. Also, thank you to CCE Delaware County. For more information about Sullivan County 4-H, be sure to check out the link below. And for more videos or project ideas, make sure that you visit Cornell Cooperative Extension Sullivan County Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. As always, be safe and have fun in nature.